Hi, this is Phoenix, and I'm going to talk a little bit about existentialism. I'm going to start off by describing an analogy that I had by way of a discussion with one of my friends. Basically, this friend was critiquing existentialism because his perspective was that Sartre is incorrect when he says that we are separate and different from things such as tables and chairs. We are not separate from certain objects in the world. I believe that my friend was describing how we are actually a part of those things. And it is essentially incorrect to say that we are above those things, that we have our own existence, that we are completely free, etc. I think that these are valid critiques of Sartrean existentialism, but I would say that it misses the point in a lot of ways because it doesn't take into account Sartre's deeper philosophy. The way that I've been able to understand existentialism recently is by reading Irrational Man by William Barrett. And I've been thinking about existentialism in general and how existentialism, even though a lot of it came out of Sartre, there is a lot that is existential that isn't attributed to him at all. And that is because existentialism is, to use Robert C. Solomon's idea, it's not necessarily a movement of thought or a movement in time. It is more of a way of thinking about things, a way of interpreting questions and interpreting reality. And I think that's an important point because while you certainly wouldn't want to limit yourself to existentialism and existentialist ways of thought, you would certainly want to be able to engage with the ideas of existentialism and really and understand that a lot of these issues are issues that we deal with in general. William Barrett is interesting when he talks about the analytic tradition of philosophy and basically saying that with the analytic tradition, it was the death of really important questions, so to speak. And this actually makes a lot of sense because the existentialists ask a lot of important questions, such as about our identity, our place in the world, our contingency. And speaking of contingency, the fact that we exist in a certain time, we exist in a certain place, we exist in a certain body, and how all of that is contingent and out of our control. I certainly think that existentialism is important because throughout the speakers, because through the speakers of existentialism, you get all of these ideas of our emotional feelings towards life itself and towards reality, and we are eventually left with the idea that life is very expansive, and that not only we are contingent, but it's also very complicated, and existence is something very difficult to understand. So I ultimately realized that I don't necessarily need to provide counter arguments to this friend who is critiquing existentialism, because ultimately I don't need to defend it. But I do think that it is interesting how William Barrett draws parallels of existential thought throughout time, starting with the ancient Greeks, moving all the way to the modern era of art, from people like Yeats, as well as someone like Jackson Pollock. You can even get these implications from ideas that he pulls from quantum physics and Kurt Gödel's mathematical proofs, this whole idea of incompleteness and the idea that we can ultimately never set out to prove the things that we set out to prove. And this creates an anxiety because it means that there is only so much that we can know. I think that William Barrett is an interesting philosopher, and I'm glad that I've been able to study his perspective of existentialism because I think there is a lot to learn in that book. And I'm really fascinated by the way that he follows certain strands of existentialist thought. He does a really good job at analyzing the idea of essence, of Plato's essence, and pointing out the contrasting field of thought in something like existentialism or even existence in general, and the realization that we are very subjective beings and that many things that happen to us are filtered through our sense apparatus, as well as just our general perspective on life. And this is something that I remind myself, is that I may get frustrated with certain perspectives, I may not agree with them, and I may think that they're even problematic, but if there's anything that I've learned from existentialism and reading William Barrett's book, it's the idea that reality is far more incomprehensible than we would ever realize and could ever admit, but that it is a very beautiful thing, even if it's something that fills us with dread and anxiety. This is Phoenix, and I hope you enjoyed this talk. Thank you for your time.